Hello everyone and welcome to the most awaited game from the round 4 of the 2022 US Championship. It is former 2700 player Moke Niemann versus former 2800 player and former FIDE World Chess Championship challenger Fabiano Caruana. It's quite the game, features a very exciting line of the Nimzo-Indian. There's quite a lot of theory, like the first 20 moves are theory, but then it gets very exciting. So let's dive straight into it and see what Hans prepared for Fabi, or maybe what Fabi prepared for Hans. So here, pawn to d4. We have knight to f6, like we've advertised. It's going to be a nice Nimzo-Indian. c4, e6, knight to c3, and bishop to b4. The Nimzo-Indian defense is on the board, and we have queen to c2, the classical variation. So if the bishop ever captures, you can capture with the queen. You don't have to mess up your pawn structure. We have castles by Fabi, a3, and bishop captures on c3. Queen captures, and now d5, the Noah variation. Bishop to g5, now asking how does black want to play this. You could play knight bd7, d captures, or you could challenge the bishop right away, kind of forcing the capture on f6. So bishop captures, queen captures, and now knight to f3 by Hans. D captures on c4, we have queen captures, and now knight to c6. We have queen back to c3. This is the top engine move, and it is the standard move in this line. Everyone plays this. We have rook to e8, and now rook to d1. We have pawn to e5 now, as the white king is still in the center. Of course, Fabi wants to open up the position, but this is all still theory. Pawn to d5 chases away the knight. Knight to b8. So retreating to the starting square, but you are preparing c6 to challenge white center. And now here in this position, e3 or e4 are the moves that are played. You could play e4, which is nice. Defends d5, also prevents bishop to f5, but Hans goes for e4. He wants to develop the light square bishop. He doesn't care about bishop to f5. So that's how Fabi develops it. We have bishop to e2, and now knight to d7. So kind of saying, are you maybe interested in a nice nice capture on c7? But if you capture on c7, then you just allow black to develop with many tempi. For example, rook e to c8. Now you have to figure out where to put your queen. Then the rook comes to c2, and especially if you capture the other one, then it's just knight to c5, and then once knight to d3 check, okay, knight to d3 for the moment isn't possible. Let's say queen to b5. You can play rook 8 to b8 to challenge the queen, and after, let's say, queen to a5, now the capture on b2, and you've given black full development. So not really worth it. You can't castle, the bishop would be hanging, so it would be, well, close to winning for black, if not outright winning. So instead, after knight d7, we have just castles by Hans, and now rook 8 to c8, defending the pawn here, preparing to open up the position with c6. And now there are some games where bishop to b5 was played, and it does make sense. You prevent c6, you also pin the knight, so the knight cannot move. But here Hans plays pawn to a4, and it is now, as of move 17, that we have a completely new game. So this a4 idea goes well with what actually happens in the game, as Hans wants to play a5, a6 and mess up Fabi's pawn structure so he can take advantage of the weakened pawns. So here we have pawn to c6. Fabi, of course, wants to challenge that strong d5 pawn, and now Hans has to make a decision. Does he want to take, for example, captures queen, moves somewhere, let's say queen b4, put pressure on the b7 pawn, then Hans can Fabi can defend it or something, but instead he plays pawn to d6. And this is a very committal move, because although the pawn is on d6, it's a passed pawn, so it's very close to promotion. It's very easy for black to organize an attack against this pawn. Even the knight can, if you manage to remaneuver the knight all the way to f5, then the knight can also help out. So this pawn is likely to fall. The question is, what can Hans do with all the time the pawn is alive? So here, rook c to d8 by Fabi. We have pawn to a5, preparing to mess up Fabi's pawn structure. With a6, we have bishop to g4. Fabi wants to get rid of the knight here. h3, and the bishop captures on f3. Now, Hans could play bishop captures, but then he allows Fabi this very nasty e4 move, which forces a queen trade, and it's not something that you would enjoy. For example, captures, let's say bishop g4, now rook e5 is possible, going after the pawn, and now a6 is met with this very nice b5, and okay, it's a game. but the pawn is still weak. It's fairly easy to organize an attack against the pawn, and if the pawn start marching forward, it will also be easy for Fabi to create a pass pawn of his own. So here Hans captures with the g pawn. He plays g captures, and the bishop here will be used to control the queen side. So knight to f8. Fabi continues remaneuvering his knight so he can go after the d6 pawn. Queen to b4, now putting pressure on b7, and just rook to d7. We have rook to d2, preparing to double up here. And now, well, Fabi could play a6 and say, okay, I'm not giving you any counterplay. Fabi says, nope, you can do that. I'm just going after the d6 pawn. So knight to g6, rook f to d1. Now the d pawn is nicely defended, but the problem is it's on a dark square, so Hans cannot defend it with a light square bishop, and Fabi can attack it with the knight and with the both rooks and with the queen. So 4 attackers versus 3 defenders, the pawn will surely fall. So knight to h4 with tempo as it attacks the f3 pawn as well. Queen to g4 defending on f3, and now just rook to e6, adding another attacker to the pawn. King to f1, sidestepping any nasty checks, and now knight to f5. And from f5, the knight now completes its long journey and is attacking the d6 pawn. So, okay, the d6 pawn will fall, but Hans did what Hans wanted to do. He will mess up Fabi's queen side. So b captures, bishop captures, and now we have rook d captures on d6. We have rook captures on d6, and now not rook captures, but here Fabi decides to keep the rooks on the board, plays knight captures on d6. And now, what do you play? Here we have bishop back to d3. Also, you could consider something like bishop to e2 if you want to add more defense to the pawn here. Also, queen b4 is very nice. Put some very unpleasant pressure on the knight here. Maybe queen to b8 check. You can eliminate the pawn, but it leaves the king side unguarded. So while it is possible and it's a perfectly fine move, Hans goes for bishop to d3 instead. G6 now, you don't want this diagonal open as long as Hans has a light square bishop. So G6, we have pawn to h4, hoping to get h5 in, but Fabi just closes it. Pawn to h5. We have G3, and now king to g7. And okay, the position is now very nice for Fabi. He's up a pawn, and Hans has to figure out how to play this. And he plays pawn to e4. And while this does restrict the movement of black's pieces, it also pretty much destroys his own bishop. Now the light square bishop isn't really doing anything. And okay, you've taken away these squares from the black knight, and even though the black knight could enjoy a nice square on f4, it's very hard to actually get the knight there. There's no square from which you can get it to f4. So okay, e4 does serve a purpose. Queen to e7. We have queen to g5. Hans wants to trade queens now, but Fabi says nope. Now, as you are out of attacking options, the queen side is completely blocked. The king side is completely blocked. I'm gonna shift my attention to the queen side. So queen back to c1. Hans has to defend the pawn. Queen to b4. And now we have queen to d2, offering a queen trade. And okay, Fabi says there's no other way to push forward. We have captures, captures, and king to f6 now, preparing g5, which will surely create a passed h-pawn. So here Hans goes pawn to b4, always an important move, controlling c5 and a5, so Fabi can't just start pushing pawns. g5, we have rook to a2 now, going after the a7 pawn, and now just knight to c8. And here, a very interesting thing happens. Bishop to a6 attacks the knight, knight back to d6, bishop back to e2 by Hans, and knight back to c8 by Fabi, defending the pawn. But now Hans doesn't repeat. Hans actually pushes for more. He plays f4. So even though he's down a pawn and he is, well, in an endgame where he is basically defending, he is willing to push this for more than a draw. So now he's attacking the h5 pawn, and okay, g captures on h4. If you go for some other capture, it's not going to be as great. So g captures on h4 first, bishop captures on h5, and now knight to d6. Now Fabi can abandon the defense of the a7 pawn, as the e4 pawn is also hanging. So now rook captures on a7, e captures on f4 first. We have f3 now, the e4 pawn is defended, and now rook to e5, attacking the bishop here, bishop to g4, and now knight to c4, with some nasty tricks of knight to e3 check, attacking the king, maybe trading off the bishops. And it's not easy to continue the game for Hans. In the game, Hans played king to g2, but very interesting was rook to a6, as the pawn cannot move. And now, even if knight e3 check, king f2, and now you capture this bishop with check, f captures, and now rook captures on e4. The thing is, you don't go for this capture and allow king to g5. You first play king to f3. You chase away the rook, and only after the rook defends this pawn, now you play king captures on f4. So that's one way to play this. But after Hans's king to g2, Fabi's position definitely comes alive. He plays rook to b5 now, puts pressure on the b4 pawn, rook a4, defending the pawn, and now, okay, you can't chase away the rook with knight b2 because this will be a problem, but also just rook a6 can go after the pawn. Yeah, this isn't really a problem. Yeah, if you go after the knight, we can just play knight to d3, and it's perfectly fine. So, okay, just rook goes to a6, and nothing really is happening here. So it's better the way Fabi played it. He goes knight to e5, king to h3 now, hoping to grab the h4 pawn, but just king to g5 defending it. And now rook to a8, as there are no active moves here, so he will try to go after the h pawn this way. Now Fabi grabs the b4 pawn, rook to h8, and now king to f6. And now the problem is there's no good way to capture the h4 pawn. If you capture with the king, just knight g6 check, forks the king and the rook, and if you capture with the rook, then rook to b1. And now you have all sorts of problems. The threat, of course, is just winning the rook, and even if you move the king, just c5, and the c pawn marches forward. So after king to f6, we have rook to h5, now threatening some very nasty rook f5 check ideas. The king has to move, then the knight hangs. So now rook to b5, defending the knight, and rook f5 check. King e7, and now bishop to h5. So putting pressure on f7, the knight now cannot move, but that's just the thing, the knight can move. Now, interestingly, here king to e6 is outright winning for Fabi. Point is that after rook captures on f4, and there really isn't a better move, there's this very nasty knight d3, attacking the rook and the bishop. So you have to play bishop to g4 with check, or bishop captures on f7, doesn't really matter. But after king f7, now comes rook f5, and after rook captures on f5, bishop captures, there's c5, and there's no good way to stop the pawn. If you want this diagonal to open up, you have to play e5, and then the knight just gobbles up the pawn. You can't play f4 because the knight just gobbles up the pawn, and black will be up too many pawns. So after bishop h5, we have knight to g6 instead by Fabi, and this sort of allows Hans back into game. Bishop captures on g6, f captures, now rook captures on f4, and pawn to g5. So Fabi manages to save his h4 pawn, rook to g4, and now king f6, defending the pawn here. And now Hans does not wait any longer. Here, Hans should go with rook to g2 or rook to g1 and just fight against the passed c pawn. But here we have pawn to f4, and now Fabi has a very, very clean idea on how to win the game, but it's not easy to understand why. So feel free to pause the video and try to find the only winning move that wins for Fabi while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on realizing that the rook on b5 is very vulnerable. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is rook to b3 with check. And to understand why this is very important, the problem is if we go g captures on f4 right away, then look at this. Rook captures on f4, king to e5, and now look at this. Rook captures on h4, and now c5. White starts to run with the king. You want to get as close as you can to the c pawn, and now black loses this very valuable tempo of pawn to c4, because now rook h5 check will win the rook. So that's kind of the point. Here you have to realize that you have to move the rook from b5 before actually capturing here. So rook b3 check. We have king to h2, and now comes the a crucial part of the game. Fabi now doesn't play g captures on h4, which is now winning, as the rook is not vulnerable here in the line that we've shown, but instead he plays rook to b2 check, and this allows Hans to play king to g1, which keeps him in the game. But Hans doesn't go king to g1, Hans just goes back king to h3. Point is, after king to g1 and you start pushing c5, you can play rook captures on g5, and now c4 is met with rook to c5. So everything is nicely defended. So king to h3 instead by Hans. There's even a moment of this. Let me just check real quickly. If you guys are interested, I can even show you this moment. Just give me a second. I have it somewhere here. Yeah, I think this is it. There we go. So here you can see Fabi will now deliver this check. The rook is on b3. Fabi now gives the check, and Hans immediately plays king h3. So he took like 2 seconds to decide on the move, which was not enough. King to g1 was much, much better. But what are you going to do? This is move 60, so you have to play it. But now Fabi repeats rook to b3 with check, king to h2, and now Fabi doesn't miss the second time. G captures on f4, rook captures on f4 with check, king to e5, and now rook captures on h4. And now there are 2 ways of winning this. One is to play king to d4, which is very nice because you just start pushing the c pawn, and if e5 is ever played, you just capture it. The white king is too far away. The other ways to do it, the way Fabi did, is to go after the pawn, but this is a bit slower. Here, rook to h6 goes after the pawn. Now, rook c3, and now if Hans repeats rook to h4, then you have to play king to d4 and just leave the pawn b. But Hans plays king to g2, and now king captures on e4. We have rook to d6, cutting off the black king, but now king to e3. Rook e6 check, king to d2, rook to d6 check, king to c2, and Hans gets the come closer with the king. King f2, pawn to c5, rook to c6, and now king to d2. Cutting off the white king, we have rook to c8, pawn to c4. We have rook to c7, rook to c2, and now rook to d7 check. Fabio moves the king with check, king c3 check. We have king to e1, and now rook to h2. So how do you continue this? King to d1, of course Hans would enjoy having his king in front of the pawn, but just rook to h1 check, king to e2, and now king to c2, preparing to push the pawn to c3, rook to d3 check, king to b3. Now the pawn prevents rook to d3 check, so Hans needs to go all the way back. Now pawn to c3. And now the problem is, although you kind of want to play king to d3, you cannot, because rook to d1 check wins the rook here. So instead we have rook to b8 with check, king to c2, and now rook to a8. And here, after rook to h7, it was in this position on move 80 that Hans Moke Niemann resigned the game, and Fabiano Caruana is the winner of this very nice clash in round 4 of the US Chess Championship 2022. So quite a wild game, very nice line of the nice Nimzo-Indian. Hans really tried to stir some trouble with that d6 pawn push, really weakened Fabi's queen side, but Fabi kept the pawn. He just continued pushing, and in the end well, basically there were a few moments, but yeah, had Hans defended well, would be a draw, but he didn't. So Fabi was able to grind it out. But it took 80 moves, which is very, very nice. And now there's really nothing you can do after rook to h7. Whatever you play, you can make a rook king. You can make, for example, rook c8. You're gonna play king to b2. Now rook to b8 check. You're gonna play king to c1. Now the pawn comes to c2, and so on and so on. Not much to be done there. You can even go rook to h2 check. Here, if king to e3, you can go pawn to c2, and now there's not all that much you can do. If rook to d3, you're just gonna play king to d1, and this is a neat little trick. Now you will queen the pawn. Even if the pawn is captured, now you just play rook h3 check, kick away the king from the defense of the rook, as all of these squares are covered, so you have to move the king. Now king captures, and now you don't promote the pawn, but you actually checkmate the white king. So there are many ways to winning this, depending on how white would defend. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. With this win, Fabiano is now in sole lead of the US Chess Championship 2022 with 3 full points out of 4, followed by Samuel Sevian with 2.5, and then a whole lot of other people on 2 points. So we're going to discuss the standings in a bit more detail, but after a few more rounds are played. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, big congratulations to everyone who found that pause the video moment, because it was not an easy one. F4 is very nice by Hans, and it should lead to a draw, but Fabi found why it doesn't. Just, I mean, wonderful stuff, this check, as he really had to see that the rook would hang there. You would be too slow to push the c pawn. I mean, this is truly brilliant stuff. So yeah, once again, hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Jose Palacio, Chris Malan, GJ, Red Rose, and Kerrigan for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of everything that is happening in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.